Hello, and welcome to Activating Diversity, Making Good Trouble with Your Ballot. We will first have our welcome by President of the American Bar Association, Ms. Trish Rifo.
Well, thank you. It's lovely to see at least some of you, and I appreciate very much the opportunity to be here and to welcome you. I want to especially thank the GP Solo section and especially its diversity committee for offering this terrific program, Making Good Trouble with Your Ballot, which of course brings to mind the wonderful John Lewis around making good trouble. And my second favorite saying from him is, when you pray, move your feet, which sort of is part and parcel of making good trouble. So let me recognize the organizers, the panelists, and all of you who are attending this webinar for taking interest in these critical issues of justice and democracy for our nation. In helping people defend their civil rights, lawyers, of course, are the guardian of democracy. And the American Bar Association is the vehicle through which many of us choose to serve out that guardian mission. Lawyers support fair and open elections because voting is the most basic right in our democracy, especially in these times. As we demonstrate our commitment to anti-racism and equity, one of the simplest ways to do so is to help others exercise their right to vote. I signed up to be a poll worker on Tuesday, but we had so many folks who signed up to be poll workers that they don't need me. But I have been encouraging lawyers across the country to sign up and serve in that capacity to assist in making this election free and fair and making sure that every eligible American citizen has the opportunity to vote. So regardless of your activity this election season, by attending this and other ABA programs, you are demonstrating the power of the world's largest voluntary bar association, trusted across the globe as we promote professional excellence and access to justice for all with an independent judiciary under the rule of law. The ABA needs the perspective, the involvement, and yes, the membership of everyone in our profession, whatever the practice area or practice setting. So please take a minute to spread the word to your colleagues and especially to young lawyers and law students about your experience with GP Solo and how you benefit from your involvement in the ABA. We're at a moment of great challenge to our nation, and together we choose to do what lawyers have done since lawyers helped to found this country. We choose to get to work to solve our challenges. And by educating ourselves and calling attention to the issues, that's what we're doing here today. So thank you again, all of you, for your participation in this program, for the critical work that you do, and for everything that our profession does to help improve justice in this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Trish, and thank you for all that you do for the American Bar Association. So again, good afternoon and good evening. Thank you for joining us for Activating Diversity, Making Good Trouble with Your Ballot. We are so glad that you could join us today, and we hope you all are staying healthy and safe during this time. We also hope that next time we'll actually see you in person. My name is Chisa Putman, and I serve as the Vice Chair of the Diversity Committee. Today's webinar moderator will be Ms. Elizabeth Meyers. Elizabeth is a 2021 GP Solo Diversity Fellow and an active member of the GP Solo Division. She has been active in the American Bar Association for many years. Previously, she served as the delegate of the ABA House of Delegates for the state of California, and she served as a commissioner on the ABA's Commission on Ethnic and Racial Diversity in the profession. And she is also a state membership co-chair for the state of California. Elizabeth is currently the managing attorney of a staff counsel office practicing in construction defect litigation. Now, before I actually turn it over to Elizabeth, I'm going to provide some housekeeping information. We highly encourage questions which can be submitted through the Zoom platform under the Q&A tab. Questions will be addressed during the last 10 minutes of the webinar. Also during this time, we will post a written downloadable resource that contains information about our panelists and their platforms. So the last item before our moderator introduces our amazing slate of panelists is going to be our conversation starter. Steve is on here and he is going to post 2 polls. Answer both honestly, because all responses are going to be anonymous. Upon posting the results of the poll, the program will begin. We'll leave it up for just a moment more. All right, so we have 96% who have voted or who plan to vote in 2020, and we have 70% who have already voted, with 30% who have not voted. So you still have time to get out and vote. Early voting is available now, but you can still vote the day of the election. So now I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth.
Well, thank you, Tisa. I am honored and humbled to moderate today's program. And I want to do a brief introduction of our dynamic speakers that we have today. We have Lisa Atkinson, who's a tribal judge and the owner of the law offices of Lisa Atkinson, where she practices in estate planning and Indian law. Kenneth Lawson, he is the co-director of the Hawaiian Innocence projects. And Katherine Culliton-González, co-chair of the Civil Rights section of the Hispanic National Bar Association. We also hope to have Desmond Meade join us. I know he was running a little late, and he is the executive director of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. So I wanted to get this started since we have only an hour. In July of this year, we lost Representative John Lewis, who devoted his life to racial justice and equality. His words impacted multiple generations, and his words continue to inspire and have a call to action. And he said, "Get in good trouble, necessary trouble." My question to you panelists is, how are you making good trouble? And I will turn it to Lisa first.
Good afternoon. First of all, I want to say thank you to the ABA and Judy Solo for asking me to be a part of this panel. I am floored by the co-panelists here. I feel like I'm a little out of my depth, but I'll do the best I can. So what am I doing to create good trouble? Well, a number of things. I am reaching out locally. I like President Rifo. I also try to be able to we don't have in-person voting here in Hawaii, but we do have voting service centers. And I had tried to volunteer to be somebody to be a service at the service centers. And again, like President Rifo was told, that they had plenty of people, which was very, very nice to hear. So other than that, I'm reaching out to my friends, family, colleagues, and expressing my thoughts on voting, not any particular candidate, although close friends and family do know my positions, but just encouraging people to vote and trying to provide information to all of my networks on any challenges they might have while voting, such as being turned away or not receiving a ballot in time or messing up on their ballot and having to request a supplemental ballot. So that's what I'm doing at this point in time.
That's wonderful. It's good to reach out locally. So we have to make sure that everyone gets an opportunity. Ken, with your focus on voting rights, how are you making good trouble?
Well, I make good trouble wherever I go. And I practiced in civil rights before I became a law professor here at the University of William S. Richardson School of Law, University of Hawaii. And I'm still active in the community. And what we saw over the last year with respect to the Black Lives Matter movement, the George Floyd case, Breonna Taylor, we saw a lot of activism. And so the question becomes, how do you take that activism and make it into some type of power? And so what I've been doing on social media when I teach my law students here in Hawaii, is to register to vote and get out to vote. When you look at what's been going on, I mean, take the Attorney General for Kentucky, who refused to indict the officers for murder of Breonna Taylor. Good trouble is when you go to the poll and you exercise your right to vote, not just in the presidential election, but at the lowest level. When you're talking about electing the mayor, city council members who can effectuate police reform, all those things are extremely important. When you're talking about voting for senators in your particular state, right? We've seen over the last 4 years since President Trump has been in office, 200 federal judges have been appointed. Not one Black person has been appointed as a federal judge after 200. And these are seats for the rest of their lives. So when I hear people say, hey, man, why am I going to vote? This system is against us anyway. Or, they don't look out for us, et cetera. So I'm not going to participate. They don't listen to us, Black, all that stuff. Hey, when you look at, speaking of John Lewis in Good Trouble, right? And you talk about the March in Selma where he almost lost his life, right? And you see the voter suppression going on now. If it wasn't important, they wouldn't be trying to suppress your vote. If voting wasn't important, why is everybody spending millions and billions of dollars to keep us out the voting pool? Why is it the Postal Service intentionally delaying the mail so that people's votes can't be counted? And if people think that their vote doesn't matter, hey, you know what? You need to wake up. It matters in every aspect. It's not just who's the president. It's who's that president can appoint to be on that Supreme Court. And when that Supreme Court starts taking back all those voter rights that have been fought over, going again back to John Lewis and Dr. King, right? All that stuff's being dialed back. And you got to get up and stand up. I'm sorry for going off like that, but it's just it's serious business.
Absolutely. No, I do want to explore that a little more, but I'd like to ask Kathy, I believe that, what are you doing to promote good trouble?
You're still muted.
Thank you so much, and good evening, everyone. And it's just such an honor to be here. And thank you so much to everyone out there in the audience and to Elizabeth and the committee and the ABA. And I'm just really honored to be on with my co-panelists as well, too. And just to tell you a little bit about myself, I've been practicing civil and human rights law since 1993. I am the kind of person that never thought I could become a lawyer. So I encourage other people to explore that opportunity. And I've just had wonderful, wonderful experiences, but I'm very concerned about the state of our country today. Right after law school, I went and worked in Chile, and I worked with, I worked on the transition to democracy. And just last week, the Chilean people protested, accumulated protests by finally amending the constitution that still had the vestiges of a dictator's fingerprints all over it. And so to get into good trouble, I always say yes when I'm asked to help for the cause in the right way. And I remember the bravery of my friends, right, in Chile and what they faced down. Pinochet was still in the Senate. And I'm remembering also just listening to Professor Lawson, marching across Selma when John Lewis was still alive for the 50th anniversary, and just thinking about what it is he went through, and he didn't back down. So I certainly am facing a lot less obstacles, but it's part of my job today as a HNBA to fight for voting rights and to fight against the barriers that people of color are facing today. And we have 4 different components to that. And I have to say, one of the components is litigation, which is something you need to be a lawyer to do. So we use our privilege to sue when we need to. And we do a few other things too, voter protection and advocacy for the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. So my answer is whatever it is that I'm asked to do that's for the cause, I'm willing to do it. I don't say no, and I step up. And if I feel like something's a little bit risky, I think about the risks that so many people took before me, and that I'm grateful for my privilege to stand on their shoulders and move the work forward.
Thank you. This panel is about a discussion of the 14th, the 15th, the 19th Amendment. These are amendments that, gave different people the right to vote, had to fight for the right to vote because it's such a fundamental right. It's the one thing that we can all do as Americans. Now, Ken, I wanted to ask you, you work with people, hello, Desmond, we're glad that you could join us. Thank you. And I wanted to ask you, you work with people who have been wrongly incarcerated through your Hawaiian
Innocence Project.
Innocence Project. So what kind of challenges do they face when you get their conviction overturned?
A lot of different challenges. Some of our clients have been locked up over 20 years. And so normally what happens is, if a person who has been rightfully convicted, so to speak, gets out, they're on parole, they get some type of service, they get some type of transition back into society. When you're actually innocent, when you're in prison for a crime you didn't commit and your conviction is overturned, they just let you go, right? Because you're not on probation, you're innocent. And so, having to show individuals, how do you use a cell phone? Because they weren't in when they came out. How do you order from a fast food restaurant? How do you use the internet? And then, it's that gap in the job history, right? Where were you the last? You're applying for a job here, sir. Can you tell us why you haven't worked in the last 22 years? Then explaining that. It's a tremendous uphill battle that they face when they come out. And we're learning more and more about how to deal with that, but the trauma is real. So yeah.
And how does your program help them with transitioning to all the rights that they now still have?
So we direct them in that direction. We also, I worked with the state legislature here and in getting a compensation act passed for people that are wrongfully convicted, getting paid a certain amount each year. We also send them the legal services so that they can, if they have, obviously a civil rights lawsuit to file for the wrongful conviction, and then providing those type of social services to help them transition. So we use our law students here at the law school to really work with a lot of the exonerees.
Do you think that they feel any stigma, like in going out to vote or going out to exercise certain rights?
Yeah, I think, it takes them a while to get adjusted, but they've become actively involved. I spent a lot of time with some of the brothers from the Central Park Five at our conferences. And you can, if you look, they're extremely active because they understand how powerful the system is and how powerful that vote is to change the system. And so a lot of exonerees are extremely active in the local legislatures, the state legislatures, and the the federal legislature in changing these laws and having access to vote. And so because they understand the seriousness of it.
Thank you. You had said something earlier that there are people who believe that their vote doesn't matter, that they choose not to vote because it doesn't matter anyway, or it doesn't count. I'd like to ask Kathy, what do you say to someone who who says something like that, or who like, how do you assist them, or not persuade them, but kind of educate them that every vote matters, that we've fought for this right?
Well, as a voting rights lawyer, we only have to look back to Bush v. Gore in 2000 to see how close elections can be and how much one person's vote will make a difference. And I guess I would also have to say I work with, some of the most vulnerable people, some of the most marginalized people. The Latino community in particular has had, lower turnout than other groups. And an awful lot of times behind that saying, I don't think my vote will count, it's why doesn't anyone want me to vote? I feel afraid. I'm from an immigrant family. They're attacking me. They're trying to purge me from the voting rolls. Sometimes it's also that politicians have not reached out. They haven't done the proper outreach. And I'm talking about from both sides to the Latino community. People feel misunderstood. First-time voters, many of whom are naturalized citizens, are very high propensity voters, but yet sometimes they can be the most afraid when they get challenged, and they absolutely need help. And then in the Latino community, it's a very young community. And so we have a lot of people turning 18 for the first time who are US citizens, or I guess you only turn 18 once, but they're turning 18 and voting for the first time. And maybe their parents never voted, so they didn't get taken to the polls and they didn't get shown the way to do it. But we also have other experiences knowing that once we remove those barriers, that participation can go up. With language access, participation can go up. With voter protection, participation can go up. In California, where we have a Latino Secretary of State, Alex Padilla, we know that he understands some of those barriers, and he knows how to reach particularly young Latino voters and help them learn how to vote and not feel so alienated from the process. So sometimes just behind that is the feeling that, yes, we don't really have an inclusive democracy. And yes, the issues haven't been taken into account, which is very frustrating, but also just, feeling attacked in your voting rights and needing some help to overcome those barriers.
And I'd like to ask Desmond, I asked all the other panelists, what are you doing to make good trouble?
I don't think you all have enough time. And that's one of the reasons I do have to apologize for being late, scrambling. It just got off of one of our 2 tour buses. We've been traveling the state of Florida, getting in as much trouble as we can possibly get into. Right now, we're really focusing on how we're celebrating, folks. I went through drug addiction, and while going through that, one of the things I learned was that the most important person in recovery is the newcomer, that person that just got sober. And I think the most important person in our democracy is that first time voter, that person who haven't voted in 10, 20, 30 years, and that we need to celebrate that and we need to highlight that. And so we've been traveling the state of Florida, making sure that returning citizens are not turned away from the polls and that we're celebrating them, because we want these new voters to become super voters, right? That's looking forward to participating in elections as opposed to feeling like they have to participate in elections. We've been going around distributing, we've acquired over 1 million surgical masks, and we've been donating masks and sanitizers to local supervisors of elections so that they can distribute it to their precincts to make sure that anyone that's coming to vote in person can do so as safely as possible. And then we have been rallying our returning citizens in an act, not in an act of defiance, but really in an act of having a stronger resolve that we respond to attempts to suppress the vote. We respond to attempts to intimidate or discourage voting by showing up in greater numbers, by bringing not just ourselves, but our family and our friends to the polls. And, we respond to bullies by punching them in their mouth, right? And we punch them in their mouth by showing up. And so that's what we've been doing, tracking complaints. So far, we've had like 2 complaints, but when we took our bus to the supervisor election, I believe in Columbia County, They knew that we were serious, and they end up changing their tactics and making sure that every returning citizen that coming to that county to vote, that they do get an opportunity to vote, and not provisionally either.
Do you want to explain a little bit what you mean by returning citizens, the people you work with?
Oh yeah. So when we talk about returning citizens, we're talking about people like me, people who've made mistakes in the past, who've at some point in their life had at least one felony conviction, and they have served their time, and they're back in their community and wanting to provide for their family, wanting to operate just like every other American citizen, want to be able to participate in democracy and pursue life, liberty, and happiness. Right? We're just like everybody else. We shun the word ex-felon. We shun the word felon and ex-con, because we don't have to wear those labels, and we don't go around calling people liars or cheats or whatever, uh, by way of introducing them. And so we, as human beings, we're somebody's son, somebody's father, daughter, granddaughter. We're human beings just like everybody else, and that's what we're trying to create, a narrative that folks would not be desensitized to the fact that we've had a previous felony conviction, and therefore not be as I guess not have as much empathy for the conditions in which we're facing because of our previous felony conviction.
Thank you. I wanted to ask Lisa a question. What obstacles do Native Americans who live on reservations or tribal villages face in voting? Are you seeing some challenges that need to be overcome?
There are a lot of challenges. First of all, tribal citizens were not made United States citizens until 1924, which was 4 years after the passage of the 19th Amendment. So prior to that, my ancestors and the ancestors of my fellow Native peoples were not considered United States citizens, even though we'd fought in every war, skirmish, battle, whatever, since the first people arrived on our shores. So that was the initial challenge, was the Indian Citizenship Act, which again was passed in 24. But it still didn't require states to play nice. So the states that didn't have to, most of them, many of them, chose not to. And so there had to be litigation in order for states to be required to remove obstacles and barriers that prevented Native peoples within their borders from voting. The last state to afford what was supposed to be full voting rights to on-reservation Natives was North Dakota. And that's key because North Dakota still, up until current, has continued to present roadblocks for reservation Indians and other enrolled people to vote. And among those have been ID requirements, not accepting tribal IDs, requiring physical addresses, and a lot of reservations and Native villages, people use post office boxes if they even have a mail location in their village or on their reservation. Houses don't have house numbers. You know, it's not 123 Main Street. It's you go past Cousin Earl's and you turn left, and then there's a burnt out car. I hate to use that reference, but there's a tree, there's a fallen tree, and you turn right, and then there's a house, a cedar sided house with a bouncy castle in front. That's where I live. It doesn't have a house number. And so those are just some of the challenges that tribal voters have faced since voting began, when this country began. There are a number of other issues, particularly for our elders. A lot of elders were born at home, so they don't necessarily have a birth certificate. People were taken away and put into boarding school and given different names. So their name, American name, their English name that they use now is not the name on their birth certificate, if they even had a birth certificate. So when they're trying to register to vote, they get turned away because the names don't match. There's a lot of homelessness in tribal communities, a lot of couch surfing. So somebody might not have their own house or apartment. They might be going from family to family to family, and they don't have a legal address to provide in order to be able to register even. And then when it comes to voting itself, many reservations are very large, and there may only be one post office on the reservation. And it could be, in one instance, the reservation, from the reservation to a post office, I think it's the Yavapai Apache tribe, it's 280 miles each way.
Wow.
So in order to try to make sure that your ballot gets into a mailbox or into a ballot box, you could be facing, you know, a 5-hour drive, and you might be in a family that has one car amongst 4 members, and the person who has the job needs the car, and that's more important than getting the ballot to the post office. So there are a significant number of challenges. And in February of this year, at mid-year, when we were still able to gather together, which I really missed, the Tribal Courts Council put on a CLE on voting rights of the disenfranchised. And I want to give a shout out to Matthew Campbell, who's an attorney from the Native American Rights Fund, who gave a fantastic presentation on the disenfranchisement, particularly of Native voters, and a seminal case that came out of North Dakota recently called Break Bill. And he was the lead attorney on that case and a subsequent case. And he just has done a phenomenal job representing tribal members and tribal interests in voting.
Thank you. I wanted to ask, Kathy, I understand that you're a former voting section lawyer, correct? And what is the Department of Justice doing to enforce the Voting Rights Act? We were just talking about the Voting Rights Act relating to the, you know, Native Americans. What is the Department of Justice that you know doing to support?
In recent years, not so much. And I think that that's one of the institutions that's going to really need to be reformed. So I'm sure folks are familiar with the 2013 decision by the Supreme Court in the case of Shelby County versus Holder. Our Attorney General was advocating for voting rights as opposed to opposing voting rights. He was the defendant, and it was just such an honor to serve there. And the Department of Justice's voting section, you know, always had very committed lawyers, and we took up quite a few cases. I was there for 5 years, and I did 8 federal cases, and I did a few other things too. So people were very committed. The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights has done a study, a couple of studies about the performance of the Department of Justice with regard to voting rights. And in 2018, you can see the graphs, the number of cases against discrimination, you know, went from at least a few a year to sometimes 5 or 6 a year to 1 to 0 to 0 to 0 to 0. And then in 2019, we found the same thing. And in this election year, the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division voting section has intervened against voting rights in a couple of cases. And I'm talking about the cases that have to do only with discrimination. I'm not talking about other voting rights laws that they enforce, because they have done some work for military voters, for example, and done some work on voter registration, for example. But in enforcing the Voting Rights Act, the provisions that are left of the Voting Rights Act, it's largely been left to the private bar, including NARF and MALDEF and Latino Justice and LDF, and many lawyers who've been volunteering, probably some in the audience. And the Department of Justice, rather than bringing affirmative cases, in this time with rising discrimination in voting, has intervened in 2 cases in Alabama and South Carolina against private plaintiffs who are trying to remove the requirement for a witness to have to sign an absentee ballot, which is a big hurdle in the time of COVID. And let me just mention quickly what hasn't been mentioned is that people of color, specifically Black people and Latino people are 2 or 3 times likely to die as from coronavirus, are at much higher risk. And there's data emerging about Native Americans as well. The Navajo Nation has been devastated. So the risk to take to go and vote in the polls are higher, and the risk to vote absentee and have to go get a notary or have to get a voter ID are much higher. And federal courts had wound up agreeing with the plaintiffs. The Supreme Court's overturned some of that, but the Department of Justice actually intervened on behalf of the states who wanted to make it riskier to vote this year.
Desmond, did you have something to input on that?
No, I was just really in all, that's one of the things that we're looking at is, what is the role of the state? What is the role of the government when it comes to the franchise? And we believe that, a state, for instance, in Florida, should be engaging in activity that creates a more inclusive and more vibrant democracy, should be engaging or working with advocacy organizations or grassroots organizations to make sure that each of its citizens that are qualified are informed about the different ways that they can vote, informed about their rights, and encouraged to vote. But unfortunately, just listening to Katherine, just reminded me that I live in a state where, they're forcing people to choose between putting food on their table or voting, right? And trying to engage in all kinds of tactics to intimidate or scare people from the franchise. And just hearing stories like that, it kind of angers me a little bit, but it gives fuel for us to continue the work that we're doing. And we cannot allow, that's one thing that we can't do. We can't allow the tactics of the government to discourage us, right, from the work that we're doing. And anytime that they come at us, that we should respond with even a greater engagement, greater involvement in organizing our community, getting people out to the polls, and encouraging people and making sure that people know that we're there for them. That's what we're doing in Florida, and I hope it's being done across the country.
Ken, I wanted to ask, do you see what challenges do you see for future generations? And do you think that these issues or challenges can be eliminated?
Yeah, obviously, I think, because the power of vote leads to everything. Our whole society is based on that power of vote. Whether it's justice reform, whether it's access to other to economic parity, racial equality, it all stems from the power to vote. And again, like I said when we started, this is the reason why they're going through everything they can to deny the right to vote. When as Katherine talked about the 2013 case, right? Really what they were basically saying is, well, we done went so far, there's no need to have this. And we can definitely see why there's a need for the Voter Rights Act, right? But what I'm encouraged about, when you look at AOC and you look at some of these young folks getting involved, right? And you see some of the people from the entertainment community getting involved, and people are starting to understand, what, this is about me, right? And I have a responsibility. I'm glad that Desmond is on here because I too ended up in a penitentiary for a drug addiction, right? I spent 24 months in prison as an attorney when I got addicted to painkillers, right? And I'm an addict, right? At that time, but yet I'm in prison for being an addict. And so all these types of reform has to change. And it starts with the power of the vote. Look at your local prosecutors. For the most part, they're elected. And then when we get upset because they're not prosecuting police when they shoot unarmed Black men and brown men and brown and Black women in the streets when they're unarmed, and we get mad at them. And then we have to turn around and say, well, how did they get into office? Right? They got voted in. And can I do anything to stop that? Yeah, you can register to vote and go vote, and then go around and make sure that others are doing the same thing. There's so much power in this vote. And if I could just you know, that's why I stay so active on social media and active in my law classes here, you know, to encourage the students that that you matter, that these things matter. So the hope is there. And, you know, like I said, as long as you got young folks, you know, Beto O'Rourke and all these young people, man, just, hey, they standing up to it. Come on with it, right? Because that's what you got to have, that type of attitude. Like, you know what, I'm not going to, you know, people only do to you what you let them do to you. People only do to you what you let them do to you. And that's why the reason why the Senate right now is letting Trump act a fool is because while he's acting a fool, they down there appointing all these judges. See, it's okay. That's why they ain't saying nothing, because they getting work done on this other end, appointing all these federal judges with the intent. And, you know, Katherine brought up, and, you know, people of color with the intent on keeping America white. And that's what's happening. Whether it's the borders, I mean, all this stuff is about, you know what, we can see over the next couple of decades that this is going to be a true melting pot of people of all kind of colors and backgrounds, Native Americans, Native Hawaiians, you know, Latino, Black, white, Asian. We see it coming. And it's a certain group that wants to hold on to that power. And so they blowing more than dog whistles, man. They blowing horns about this stuff. I mean, that's and people are attracted to that. And to me, like I said, this is serious business. I'm sorry, Elizabeth, for going.
Brother Kenneth, we standing up too now. Don't forget about us. We are definitely standing up, and I think it's so a key to note that, like right now in Florida, based on our data, not something that whatever some report is talking about, based on our data, we see that there is over 144,000 people that are on the voting rolls that have a previous felony conviction.
Mm-hmm.
You see that, right? And when we talk about a state where in 2000, I think Catherine talked about it, where the decision about who gets into the White House was based on less than 600 votes, and how pivotal Florida is. Those 144,000 individuals, which is a larger number than the margin of victory of any subsequent presidential election, all right, definitely has a role in determining who will win Florida this year. Those individuals, even when you break it down into their counties, into their communities, they cover the gap of multiple races, whether it's a state attorney race, whether it's a sheriff race, whether it's judicial races, right, or a mayoral race. They
Hey,
do have
Desmond,
that power.
let
Now,
me ask you a question real quick, Desmond. You know, because I don't know this, we're in Hawaii, but I know that at some point, once um, people with felony convictions in Florida were given the right to vote, then they tried to change the law and say, well, if you owe any probation fees and all, you can't vote. And I saw, like, during the NBA finals, where like LeBron James and I think even Bloomberg said that they're going to pay off. Can you tell me what was going on with that? Or
so I'm gonna touch on that because when we passed Amendment 4, you know, the Florida legislature decided that they needed to codify the requirements, right, or codify what completion of sentence meant, um, and they needed to implement the Amendment 4, and within the statute that they wrote, they required the payment of court cost, fines, and fees, and restitution before a person was able to enjoy the benefits of Amendment 4. That impacted 774,000. All right. So that's one subject right there by itself. But here's another subject, right? Another angle. When you do the math, you know, Amendment 4 cleared the pathway to 1.4 million. And if there's 774,000 that have some type of legal financial obligation, that means that there are 500,000 to 600,000 returning citizens that don't have to pay a dime, that can register to vote immediately, right? And that number is still bigger than the less than 600 that we're talking about, or the 100,000 that we've seen in subsequent elections. President Obama won Florida, I think, in 2008 by 76,000 votes, right? And so I think at the end of the day, the message that I'm really trying to push is the fact that in spite of the obstacles that folks may throw in front of us, right? We have to understand that there were over 3 million registered voters who didn't vote in Florida, right? And year after year after year, we have to understand that now we have an opportunity to welcome in 500,000 to 600,000 voters. You mentioned what LeBron James and Michael Jordan. I'm not going to mention the other name because we didn't really get anything from that other person. So I'm not going to try to give any credit where credit is not due, right? But we
Right.
had over 88,000 people who we was able to raise over $25 million, right? And pay that out in the state of Florida so that over 40,000 people can actually register to vote if they so desire to do so. And so what I am saying is that in spite of the obstacles, we still have fertile ground to engage enough people to actually bring about the change that we need to see, right? We're talking about, I'll give you a great example. In 2 years, we're going to have a governor's race, right? The last governor's race we had was decided by 40,000 votes. Understand that we have 3 times that amount of people that are registered. Why is that important? That's important because the governor, through his executive clemency power, can embrace the true spirit of Amendment 4 and ally in terms of like a Charlie Crist and say everybody gets their rights restored automatically. You see a conservative governor in Iowa just did that, right? We've seen the governor in Kentucky. The governor has the power to say everyone gets their rights restored once they've completed their sentence, and the clemency process does not require the payment of fines and fees, right? In addition to that, the governor has the power to look at our prison system and see people who have been languishing in our prisons and extend compassionate release. The governor has the power to commute sentences, right? When you're seeing that there are people that serving life sentences for crimes that don't even warrant, but maybe even a day in jail, right? And so there's a lot of power that's in that governor's office. And today, right now, we have 3 times as many people who are registered to vote who have been impacted by the governor's inaction or the governor's insistence on fighting against us being able to vote to actually make a difference in 2022. We have that power, it's there. And so we recognize the obstruction. We recognize, and matter of fact, I don't even call it poll tax anymore, right? Because I don't even want to minimize what they're doing. What they're doing is an affront, a direct affront to democracy, right? And
Thank you.
anyone engaged in discouraging voters, anyone engaged in trying to intimidate voters are unpatriotic, right? And I consider them anti-American, and
That's,
they're anti-democracy.
yeah, it's definitely a right that we all, we fought for. Every American is the right to vote. And I wanted to just, we have some questions. So I think Chisa's going to come back on and let us know what those, we have some questions for our panelists. But before we ask the questions, I just wanted to ask Kathy and Lisa. We heard Trish Grifo talk about the importance of voting and getting out the vote and going to the polls, and what can the ABA members do? What in your mind, Kathy, what can ABA members do?
There's quite a lot that ABA members can do. And I know it's only 5 days before the election. And, because of the groundswell to fight for democracy, we have, initiatives that we've done at HMBA with ABA, Power the Polls, for example, that we've been hearing that people tried to sign up to be poll workers inside the polls, and the jurisdictions, many jurisdictions have enough. I know there's some jurisdictions in Florida that still don't have enough. So keep on trying to sign up and find yourself a slot to volunteer. And if you need help with that, please feel free to email me. The other thing you can do is you can call 1-888-OUR-VOTE, 1-888-OUR-VOTE, which is election protection. And they also have many volunteers this year, but one thing they can volunteer to do is to find you a place where you can help protect voting rights on election day. And please don't forget about it after the election. We need to restore the Voting Rights Act.
Sounds great. Chisa, did you have some questions for our panelists from the audience?
Yes, ma'am. Let's see. So first question is, why is there no standard government recognized method to describe a location on an Indian reservation? Are there no surveys, lot and block numbers, or latitude and longitude grids? So I'm guessing this question is directed to Lisa.
And I responded to Stephen that it's an excellent question. And to be quite honest, I have no idea. I know obviously that as people moved west, there were surveys, there were latitude and longitudinal markings, you know, Lewis and Clark, all that. But as far as on specific Indian reservations, because tribes are sovereign, my guess would be that it would be up to tribal governments to establish addresses. And because tribal governments do not have the authority to tax, and creating streets and registering addresses are all things that cost money, it would be my guess that that might be one of the reasons. Another one might be that some tribal lands are allotted to individual Indians, and they can do with their lands what they so choose. So you might have 3 houses on one allotment, and you could have a legal description for the allotment, but you're going to get a lot of northwest of the southeast, 1/4 of western meridian, blah blah, and it's still going to be pretty onerous to track down exactly, to pinpoint where a house may be on a reservation if the tribe hasn't already established street signs and street numbers and street names.
Thank you, Lisa. This one is also directed towards Lisa, and you've answered this one, but so the other participants and attendees can hear it as well. Is there a state that rises above the others as to upholding and supporting tribal voting rights? And if so, what is it that they are doing right?
And again, thank you for this question. And I might be a little partial because I lived and worked in Washington State for most of my career. But Washington State is one of the few states that has a decent number of tribal members who serve in state politics. I say decent because I just still don't think it's enough, just like Ruth Bader Ginsburg. When will there be enough women on the Supreme Court? When there are 9. When will there be enough Native congresspersons in each state? When there are as many as there want to be. But Washington has passed a Native American Voting Rights Act that was passed in 2019, and it helped address some of the things that came out of the Brick Bill case. Specifically, in this particular act, it helps provide a broader range of address qualifications. So address can be basically any place that the tribe identifies, including marinas. It can be tribal buildings. So a tribe could designate as the legal address for every single one of its citizens the tribal government office. And that, under the new Washington law, would be sufficient for people to be able to register and vote.
Thank you, Lisa. This one is directed towards Desmond. The statement or the question is, when I voted a few years ago in favor of the Florida constitutional amendment regarding felons voting, I read many summaries and discussions of the proposal. None of them even mentioned the argument that the amendment did not allow such individuals to vote if they still owed fines, restitution, etc. When that became an issue after the amendment passed, I looked at the specific wording of the provision and saw that the argument that was being made to keep them from voting, which led to the legislation you referenced, was an obvious one. So the question that occurs to me is whether this result came about because the drafters of the amendment did a terrible job of drafting, not anticipating the issue, or whether they drafted it in the way they did so as to sort of a political deal to get the support of certain groups that would not have otherwise supported it.
Wow. That's a good question, right? Because you're gonna have me do something that you don't see too many people do, right? Let's take responsibility. Yeah, I was involved in the drafting of that, and I think we did a tremendous job, and we knew exactly the challenges that we faced. Um, you got to remember that when we in Florida, um, we have parameters in which we're allowed to operate as it relates to a citizens initiative. It's much different than any constitutional amendment that the legislature could put on. It's the rules are just totally different. And our guidelines is that we have a word limit, and then we have to make sure that it doesn't violate the single subject rule, that it's not engaged in electioneering, that it's not confusing to the voters, right? And because of that, we had to really delve into this language. And I'm going to tell you, those of you all who live in Florida know that uh, we had a constitutional amendment, fair districts. We had Amendment 5 and Amendment 6. We had legalized the marijuana uh, um, amendment the first time. And when you looked at all of those three amendments, what folks can tell you is that we spent twice as long, right, preparing Amendment 4 language, right, as the crafters of the Amendment 5, 6, and medical marijuana did combined. And those petitions were several pages long, while our petition was only one page. And because of that, I mean, we spent about 2 years. We brought in retired Supreme Court justice. We brought in the top constitutional lawyers in the state and in the country, and we brought in key politicians. We brought in the best of the best. We had Brennan Center, ACLU, Advancement Project, Citizen Project, Brennan Center for Justice, and NAACP and PICO. We brought, tons of people to this process, and this is what we came up with. We knew, though, and be very clear, we knew that when we used completion of sentence, that there was a possibility that the legislature may try to attach some financial obligations to it, and we understand that when you looked at the in the courts, you see that you basically had two types of financial obligations: those that were punitive in nature and those that were administrative in nature. We had no expectation of them actually attaching administrative costs or non-punitive legal financial obligations to completion of sentence. I can tell you right now that as a returning citizen, we even seriously considered restitution, and we felt that that was a part of the process. Um, but we knew that that number was much smaller. When you look at the 774,000 individuals, the overwhelming majority of those individuals, their financial obligation is tied up in court costs, administrative costs, not a fine, a statutorily imposed fine that was legally a part of the sentence, right? That if you're convicted of violating Florida statute 775.123, which reads that if you violate the statute, you face up to a certain amount of years in prison plus a certain amount of a fine, then don't, if you're at the time of sentencing issued that fine, that is part of your sentence. All right. And so we could see that argument being made, but we knew that the majority of Florida laws did not have statutorily imposed fines. And then we knew that restitution only appears in about 4 to 6% of the cases. So the overwhelming, you're talking 96, 94% of the cases, we knew they were not going to have any monetary financial obligations. Where the legislature, the direction they went was to actually include those, and that became problematic. But the statute or the language itself was, matter of fact, I could tell you, it was so brilliant. The language was so tight that even when, in Florida, whenever you attempt to put a constitutional amendment on the ballot, it has to have Supreme Court review, right? It has to go through a challenge where anyone could challenge the validity or the constitutionality of that particular language. And when we went through, we had no challenges. Our language was so tight and just, it was written brilliantly that no one could even foster up an argument. The Attorney General herself had to admit that there was nothing there to argue. Supreme Court didn't see anything there to argue as well. And we were able to get our language cleared to be placed on the ballot. Not even an amicus brief was submitted against it. So I stand by our language, and we were given what we worked with what we was given. And listen, we did what we accomplished to do. And that was
Thank
tear
you.
down 150-year-old Jim Crow law.
Yeah. I really appreciate, I want to thank all the panelists. We've run out of time. And like any good webinar, I feel like we could have talked another hour. So I appreciate that we want more from you. And so thank you. I do want to conclude with another Representative John Lewis quote. And that's when he said, "My dear friends, your vote is precious, almost sacred. It is the most powerful, nonviolent tool we have to create a more perfect union." And I don't think that there is a better quote that we could end this this program on. So I really appreciate it. Thank you, panelists. If you could hold on just one more second, while I would appreciate it, because I wanted to also remind everyone on the webinar that this is the first part of a 4-part series. Our next diversity presentation is called Activate Diversity: From the Rooney Rule to the C-Suite in Sports. And that's on December 9th, 2020. We also have Activate Diversity Criminal Justice Forum. That's on January in 2021, January 19th. And we also have Activate Diversity Lead by Example, and that is February 25th, 2021. So thank you, everyone, and I really appreciate your participation. Chisa, did you have anything else?
Yes, I just want to echo Elizabeth. Thank you so much for everyone's participation. I commend our panelists. I commend our moderator. It was a great program. We truly appreciate your participation. But before we go, we would like to do one follow-up poll. So we have the poll at the beginning. Have you voted? Do you plan to vote? Our last poll. If you were not planning to vote in 2020, has this presentation changed your mind? Again, this is completely anonymous. We just ask that you answer the question honestly. And while you're answering that question, again, just to piggyback or follow up on what Elizabeth said, this is series 1 or part 1 of a series of 4 programming that is presented by the GP Solo Diversity Committee. We're very excited about the path that our programs are taking, and we hope that you're able to join us. Again, December 9th, January 19th, and February the 25th. All will be great programs, and we think that you will get a lot of information from the programs and find them very beneficial. So again, we cannot thank you enough. We thank Ms. Trish Rifo, ABA President, all of our panelists, Lisa Atkinson, Katherine Culliton-González, I apologize, Katherine, Kenneth Lawson and Desmond Meade, and of course, Elizabeth Meyers for serving as our panelist. We appreciate your time. We appreciate your knowledge.
We are also soliciting some video clips for our last presentation called Activate Diversity, Lead by Example, where we're asking people to answer, how will you lead and activate diversity? So we invite all our panelists to please, if you wanted to stay on and let us know how will you lead and activate diversity in just a short little clip, we'd appreciate that. Otherwise, we also invite everyone in the audience to submit a short clip when they register for that last session.
And this will conclude our programming for this evening. Y'all have a great day, and we have our polling results. So if you were not planning to vote in 2020, has this presentation changed your mind? And 65% said yes. That's awesome. 35% said no. Hopefully that means that they were already planning. Well, hopefully that means that they're still on the fence and they can still be, convinced to do otherwise. But we have 65% that it did change their mind. So every little bit helps. But thank you all again so much for participating this evening. Thank you for your time. And I know we've gone over just a little, but it was for a good reason. So thank you again.
Thank you.